The stranger stood up in the middle of my wedding reception, raised his glass, and smiled directly at me. "To Danny boy," he said. The room went silent. My stomach dropped. Nobody had called me Danny boy since I was 6 years old. Not my friends. Not my fiancé. Not even my parents. Yet this gray-haired man I had never seen before spoke the nickname perfectly. I looked toward my mother. Her face had gone completely white. My father nearly dropped his champagne glass. And in that moment, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I realized my parents were terrified of a stranger. I had no idea why. But I was about to find out. And the truth would nearly destroy my family. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 36 years old, and until my wedding day, I thought I knew everything about my parents. I was wrong. Very wrong. The stranger introduced himself as Thomas. He looked to be around 65. Kind eyes. Neat suit. Calm smile. Nothing threatening about him. Yet my parents reacted as if they had seen a ghost. After the toast, Thomas walked over and shook my hand. "Congratulations, Danny boy." I forced a smile. "Do I know you?" His eyes softened. "No." Then he glanced toward my parents. "But I knew people who loved you very much." Before I could ask another question, my father stepped between us. His voice was sharp. "That's enough." I had never heard my father speak that way to anyone. Thomas nodded sadly. Then he left. Just like that. My wedding continued. Everyone danced. Everyone laughed. Everyone celebrated. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. And neither could my wife, Emily. That night, after everyone left, she sat beside me on the hotel balcony. "You saw your parents' faces too, right?" I nodded. They looked terrified. "Who was he?" "I have no idea." Emily frowned. "But he knew your childhood nickname." The more I thought about it, the stranger's words became unsettling. Not, "I knew your parents." Not, "I knew your family." He had said, "I knew people who loved you very much." People. Plural. Something felt wrong. 3 days later, I called my mother. "Who was Thomas?" Silence. Then she said, "Just someone from the past." "What past?" "It doesn't matter." "It clearly matters." Her voice cracked. "Daniel, please let it go." Then she hung up. That had never happened before. Not once in my life. A week later, I visited my parents. I hoped things would feel normal. Instead, I found my father burning old papers in the backyard fire pit. Boxes of them. Photographs. Letters. Documents. I walked closer. "What are you doing?" He jumped. Actually jumped. Like he'd been caught. "Just cleaning." I spotted a partially burned photograph. For one brief second, I saw a younger version of my mother. Standing beside someone whose face had already been destroyed by flames. My father quickly shoved it deeper into the fire. My heart started pounding. That night, I told Emily everything. The stranger. The phone call. The photographs. She looked worried. "You think they're hiding something?" "I know they are." Weeks passed. The mystery consumed me. Then another clue appeared. One evening, I received a message from an unknown number. A single photograph. Nothing else. The image showed a little boy. About 6 years old. Standing beside a lake. Behind him was a woman. The woman looked exactly like my mother. I stared at the picture. The boy wasn't me. At least I didn't think so. Then I noticed the date. 1989. 3 years before I was born. My hand started shaking. I immediately called the number. No answer. I texted. Who is this? Nothing. Hours later another message arrived. Ask your parents about Jacob. That was it. Jacob. A name I had never heard before. The next morning I drove straight to my parents' house. I placed the photograph on the kitchen table. My mother gasped. My father turned pale. Neither spoke. Who is Jacob? Silence. Who is he? My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Finally she whispered. Please stop. I couldn't believe it. Stop? You expect me to stop? No answer. No explanation. Nothing. I left furious. For the first time in my life, I felt like my parents were strangers. And deep down, a terrible suspicion began growing. What if they had another child? What if Jacob was my brother? What if something happened to him? And what if my parents had hidden it from me my entire life? But that wasn't even the worst thought. The worst thought came 2 weeks later. When I discovered Thomas meeting secretly with my mother. And what I saw that day convinced me my parents were guilty of something unimaginable. As I watched my mother hand an envelope to the stranger from my wedding, I became convinced that my parents weren't protecting a secret. They were hiding a crime. And I was determined to uncover it. I followed my mother for 43 minutes across town. The entire drive, I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. There had to be. But when I saw her walk into a quiet cafe and sit across from Thomas, the stranger from my wedding, every excuse disappeared. Then she handed him a thick envelope. And both of them started crying. In that moment, I was certain my parents had lied to me my entire life. I parked across the street and watched through the window. Thomas opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. He stared at them like they were priceless treasures. My mother wiped tears from her face. I couldn't hear the conversation. But I could see the pain. The guilt. The grief. When the meeting ended, Thomas hugged her. Not like friends. Not like acquaintances. Like family. I waited until my mother left. Then I walked inside. Thomas looked up. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He looked sad. Almost relieved. I sat down. Who are you? For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he quietly answered. Someone who made a promise. My patience snapped. What does that even mean? He looked away. I can't tell you. I laughed bitterly. Of course not. Daniel. Stop calling me that like you know me. His eyes filled with tears. And somehow that only made me angrier. For months I had been chasing shadows. For months my parents had refused to answer simple questions. Now this man was doing the same thing. I stood up. If none of you are going to tell me the truth, I'll find it myself. His voice followed me as I walked away. You deserve the truth. I turned. Then tell me. But he shook his head. No. That night I barely slept. Emily tried to calm me down. Instead, I became obsessed. I hired a private investigator. For the first time in my life, I started digging into my own family. And what we found terrified me. 3 weeks later, the investigator called. I found records connected to the name Jacob. My heart nearly stopped. What records? There was a child. I closed my eyes. A child. My worst fear was becoming real. The investigator continued. Male. Born in 1984. I gripped the phone tighter. Keep going. There are connections to your parents. My stomach twisted. How? Your mother appears in several documents. I couldn't breathe. Was he my brother? Long pause. Possibly. Everything went silent around me. The room. The house. The world. For 36 years I had believed I was an only child. Now evidence suggested otherwise. But the investigator wasn't finished. There are hospital records too. Hospital records. My heart sank. What happened to him? I couldn't access everything. Why not? Some files are sealed. Sealed. The word echoed in my head. Sealed records. Hidden photographs. Secret meetings. Destroyed documents. My parents refusing to answer questions. Every clue pointed in one direction. A cover-up. That evening I confronted my parents again. This time I wasn't asking questions. I was demanding answers. I slammed the investigation report onto the dining room table. My mother's face immediately crumbled. My father looked exhausted. Who was Jacob? Neither answered. I shouted. Was he my brother? My mother's tears started instantly. Still no answer. I looked at my father. For years I had admired him. Trusted him. Respected him. Now I barely recognized him. What are you hiding? His voice was barely audible. Please stop digging. The words hit me like gasoline on a fire. Stop digging? After months of lies? After years of deception? No. I stood. No, I'm done protecting your secret. My mother sobbed openly. My father closed his eyes. Then I said the words that changed everything. What happened to Jacob? Neither answered. My anger exploded. What did you do to him? The room froze. My mother's face shattered. My father looked like I'd stabbed him. But at that point I was beyond reason. Every clue pointed toward guilt. Every secret pointed toward shame. And every silence made them look more guilty. I stormed out. For 3 days nobody spoke. Then the final clue arrived. A package. No return address. Inside was a small journal. The cover was worn. Old. Faded. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page contained only 4 words. For Daniel. When he's ready. I stared. For Daniel. Me. The handwriting wasn't my mother's. It wasn't my father's. It wasn't Thomas's. I turned the page. And everything changed. The journal belonged to Jacob. Page after page described a boy's life. His hopes. His fears. His dreams. And then I reached an entry dated just months before my birth. The words made my blood run cold. I read them 3 times. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jacob wasn't my brother. Jacob was dying. Terminally ill. And the final pages revealed a truth so heartbreaking that I collapsed onto the floor crying. For months I had believed my parents were hiding something evil. But the real story was infinitely more painful. The stranger at my wedding. The hidden photographs. The secret meetings. The burned papers. The sealed records. Every clue suddenly meant something entirely different. And when I finally learned what Jacob had sacrificed for me before I was even born, I understood why my parents had spent 36 years unable to speak his name. The next morning, I sat across from Thomas with Jacob's journal in my hands. And for the first time, someone finally told me the complete truth. A truth that would fill me with guilt, heartbreak, and gratitude for the rest of my life. The journal slipped from my hands. For months, I had accused my parents of hiding something terrible. For months, I had imagined crimes, betrayals, and secrets so dark they could destroy a family. I was wrong. Horribly wrong. The truth was far more painful. And far more beautiful. The next morning, I called Thomas. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. "Can we meet?" His voice was quiet. "Of course." An hour later, we sat together on a park bench overlooking a lake. Ironically, it was the same lake from the photograph I'd received months earlier. The same lake where Jacob had stood smiling beside my mother. The same lake where a secret had waited for 36 years. I held Jacob's journal tightly. "Tell me everything." Thomas stared at the water for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Jacob was your brother." Even though I already suspected it, hearing the words hurt. I suddenly felt the weight of an entire missing life. A brother. Someone I should have known. Someone who should have been sitting beside me at family dinners. Someone who should have been standing beside me at my wedding. Someone who never got the chance. Thomas continued. Jacob was 8 years old when doctors discovered his illness. I swallowed hard. He spent years in hospitals. My chest tightened. He fought harder than anyone I've ever known. The image of a little boy filled my mind. A boy I never met. A boy who spent his childhood fighting for survival. Then Thomas said something that shattered me. "When your mother became pregnant with you, Jacob was thrilled." I looked up. "What?" Thomas smiled sadly. "He used to talk about you constantly." Tears filled my eyes. "But I wasn't even born." "I know." His voice broke. "He called you his little brother before he ever saw your face." I couldn't speak. Thomas reached into his coat and handed me a folded letter. "Read this." The paper was old. Fragile. Yellow with age. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. At the top were 3 words. "To my brother." My vision blurred instantly. The letter was written by Jacob. Years before I was born. Years before I took my first breath. Years before I knew he existed. The handwriting was childish. Uneven. But every word felt alive. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to meet you." I stopped. A tear landed on the page. I kept reading. "Mom says you're coming soon. Dad says you'll probably drive everyone crazy. I hope so. This house gets too quiet when I'm in the hospital." I laughed through tears. Then I continued. "I hope you love Mom and Dad. They try really hard to be brave when they think I'm not looking. Please make them smile again." My throat closed. I could barely breathe. Then came the line that destroyed me. "If I can't stay, maybe my little brother can have the life I wanted." I broke. Completely. For months I had been hunting monsters. Instead, I found love. Pure love. The kind that asks for nothing. The kind that survives even death. Thomas put a hand on my shoulder. There was more. I wiped my eyes. "What?" His own eyes filled with tears. Jacob knew his condition was getting worse. I looked down. "He made your parents promise something." My heart pounded. "What promise?" Thomas looked toward the lake. "He didn't want your childhood overshadowed by grief." I stared. "He told them not to turn your life into a memorial." The world suddenly made sense. The photographs. The silence. The secrecy. Everything. My parents hadn't erased Jacob because they didn't love him. They erased the pain because they loved me. And because they were trying to honor him. Thomas continued. After Jacob died, your parents fell apart. I closed my eyes. They could barely function. His voice cracked. But they kept their promise. The realization hit me like a wave. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every family vacation. Every happy memory of my childhood had been built on a sacrifice nobody told me about. A sacrifice made by a little boy who never got to grow up. Suddenly I understood the stranger at my wedding. Why were you there? Thomas smiled softly. I was Jacob's nurse. I stared. The nickname. His eyes watered. Jacob called you Danny Boy before you were born. I froze. What? He heard your mother use the name once. Thomas laughed sadly. And he loved it. The tears returned immediately. That nickname hadn't come from my parents. It came from my brother. The brother I never met. The brother who spent his final months imagining my future. The brother who loved me before I existed. A week later, I visited my parents. For the first time in months, nobody argued. Nobody hid. Nobody lied. My mother opened the door. The moment she saw me, she started crying. I hugged her immediately. Tightly. Like I should have months earlier. I'm sorry. She broke down completely. So am I. My father joined us. The three of us stood there holding each other. Years of pain finally coming apart. That evening we sat together and looked through Jacob's photographs. For the first time. Not hidden. Not buried. Not forgotten. Remembered. Celebrated. Loved. My mother showed me drawings he'd made. My father showed me baseball cards he had saved. We laughed. We cried. And for the first time in my life, I got to know my brother. The following year, Emily and I welcomed our first child. A son. When the nurse asked if we had chosen a name, I smiled. I already knew. Jacob. My mother cried. My father cried. Even I cried. Because some people leave this world too early. But love doesn't leave with them. Love stays. Love grows. Love becomes part of the people who come after. And every time I look at my son, I think about a boy who never got the chance to become a man. A boy who spent his final days worrying about a little brother he would never meet. A boy who taught me the greatest lesson of my life. Sometimes the secrets people hide are not born from shame. Sometimes they're born from love. And sometimes forgiveness begins the moment we finally understand the pain someone was trying to protect us from.